Have you ever noticed how some people lose control the moment you stop reacting to them? They become louder, more emotional, more desperate, and suddenly, the power shifts. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something about human nature that most people still don't. The person who controls attention controls the situation. And sometimes the most powerful move you can make is doing absolutely nothing. Today, we're uncovering 7 dark psychological tactics inspired by Machiavellian strategy. Techniques that manipulate attention, control emotions, and quietly shift power in your favor. But be careful. Once you see these tactics, you'll start noticing them everywhere. Human beings believe they are rational. We like to think we make decisions logically, calmly, intelligently. But psychology shows something uncomfortable. Most of our behavior is driven by emotion, validation, ego, and attention, and the moment someone interrupts that emotional supply, the brain reacts almost like it's experiencing withdrawal. This is why silence, indifference, and psychological distance can sometimes be more powerful than confrontation. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. His philosophy wasn't about cruelty. It was about understanding how power actually works between people. And one of his most dangerous insights was simple. Control the emotional battlefield, and you control the outcome. Let's explore 7 dark psychological strategies that reveal how this works. Section 1. The power of strategic ignorance. The first tactic is strategic ignorance. Most people assume power comes from dominance, but often power comes from emotional restraint. When someone criticizes you, insults you, or tries to provoke you, they are usually seeking something very specific, a reaction. Why? Because reactions confirm influence. Psychologists call this reinforcement. Every time someone gets a reaction from you, anger, defense, explanation, their brain receives confirmation that they affect you, and that gives them psychological power. But when you refuse to react, something unusual happens. Their brain enters a state of uncertainty and frustration, and humans hate uncertainty, which leads us to the next tactic. Section 2. The attention withdrawal effect. Attention is one of the most powerful psychological rewards. In fact, neuroscience research shows that social attention activates many of the same reward centers as money or food. This means people often behave in ways designed to earn attention, but when attention suddenly disappears, the brain interprets it as a threat. Think about what happens during arguments. When 2 people fight, both are emotionally invested. But when one person suddenly becomes calm, silent, and detached, something interesting happens. The other person often becomes more aggressive. Why? Because their brain is trying to recover the lost emotional engagement. In other words, silence destabilizes emotional control, and that leads directly into Machiavelli's next insight. Section 3. Emotional imbalance creates power. Machiavelli believed power often comes from emotional asymmetry, meaning, if 2 people are emotionally calm, power is balanced. But if one person becomes emotional while the other remains composed, the balance breaks. The emotional person begins to reveal more information. They talk more. They react more. They make mistakes. This is why experienced negotiators, interrogators, and even skilled debaters practice something called emotional neutrality. Because the moment someone else loses composure, they lose strategic control. And interestingly, most people sabotage themselves without realizing it. Section 4. The psychological trap of overreaction. When people feel ignored, disrespected, or dismissed, their ego becomes activated, and the ego hates feeling powerless. So the brain begins searching for ways to restore control. This often results in overreaction. They send long emotional messages. They escalate the conflict. They try harder to provoke you. But the more emotional they become, the more obvious their insecurity becomes. And psychologically speaking, the person who needs the reaction more holds less power. This is one reason why some of the most influential individuals appear almost unbothered by criticism. They understand something subtle. Reactivity is vulnerability, and that leads us to a darker psychological strategy. Section 5. Controlled scarcity. Human beings value things that feel rare or difficult to access. Psychologists call this the scarcity principle. When something becomes less available, its perceived value increases. This applies not only to objects, but also to people. If someone is constantly available, constantly responding, constantly explaining themselves, their psychological value often decreases. But when someone becomes selective with their attention, their presence becomes more impactful. This doesn't mean manipulation. It simply means understanding a deep psychological truth. Availability reduces perceived value. And Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology confirmed it. Section 6. Silence as psychological pressure. Silence is uncomfortable for most people, especially during tension. Our brains are wired to fill silence with explanations, justifications, or emotional responses. Interrogators use this technique constantly. After asking a question, they remain silent. And eventually, the other person begins talking, often revealing far more than they intended. Why does this work? Because silence creates psychological pressure, and pressure forces people to reveal their true thoughts and emotions, which means sometimes the most strategic move is not speaking, but simply waiting. Section 7. The ultimate Machiavellian insight. Machiavelli believed something many people struggle to accept. Human behavior is deeply influenced by perception. People respond not only to what you do, but to what they think you are thinking. If you appear calm, controlled, and emotionally independent, others often assume you have confidence and power. But if you appear reactive, defensive, or emotionally desperate, the opposite perception forms. Which means the final psychological trick is not really a trick at all. It's self-control. Because the person who controls their emotions controls their reactions. And the person who controls their reactions often controls the entire interaction. Final psychological takeaway. The true lesson here is not about manipulating people. It's about understanding how human behavior works. Attention creates power. Emotion reveals vulnerability. And silence can sometimes speak louder than words. But the real psychological advantage comes from something deeper. Awareness. Because once you understand these patterns, you start recognizing them in conversations, arguments, relationships, and negotiations. And suddenly, you see the hidden dynamics of human behavior. Machiavelli once observed that people are easier to control through their emotions than their logic. But the most powerful person in any room is the one who controls their own mind first.